Have you ever stood in a room full of people and felt completely alone? Have you ever looked at your busy calendar and realized that despite all the meetings and phone calls, your heart felt empty? Welcome to Audiobook English Stories. Tonight, I want to share the story of Sarah, a woman living in the heart of New York City. Sarah had everything the world says you should want, but she was hiding a secret. Behind her expensive clothes and her fast-paced job, her soul was carrying a heavy weight. She did not know that her next breath would be a conversation with the divine. The sun was setting over Manhattan, turning the sky a dusty shade of orange and gray. From her office on the 30th floor, Sarah watched the thousands of yellow taxis crawling through the streets like tiny insects. Her phone buzzed every few seconds with emails, in messages, and social media notifications. To the outside world, Sarah was a success. She was a top marketing executive at a famous firm. She was smart, she was fast, and she was always busy. But as the office grew quiet and the other employees went home to their families, the God-sized hole in Sarah's heart began to ache. She walked out of the building and into the cold evening air. The city was loud. People were shouting. Sirens were screaming, and the wind cut through the narrow streets. Sarah walked into a crowded grocery store, then a crowded subway station, and finally her crowded apartment building. Yet, in every place, she felt like a ghost. No one truly saw her, and she felt like she didn't truly see anyone else. She reached her apartment and dropped her keys on the marble counter. The silence of her home was louder than the noise of the streets. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman with tired eyes and a restless spirit. She had worked so hard to build this life, but now that she had it, she didn't know what it was for. She felt stuck in a cycle of working, eating alone, and sleeping. "Is this it?" she whispered to the empty room. She tried to distract herself. She turned on the television, but the noise felt hollow. She opened her laptop to work more, but the words on the screen blurred together. There was a hunger in her that food could not satisfy, and a thirst that expensive wine could not quench. It was a spiritual hunger. For years, she had trusted only in her own strength and her own intelligence. She had pushed God to the very back of her mind, thinking she didn't need faith to be happy. Tonight, the burden of her quiet loneliness felt too heavy to carry. She walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Below her, the city that never sleeps continued to roar, but Sarah felt like she was drowning in the middle of it. She was a successful woman in the greatest city in the world, but her soul was starving for a connection she couldn't name. Sarah closed her eyes and, for the first time in a decade, a memory of her grandmother surfaced. She remembered a small wooden statue of the Virgin Mary and the smell of roses. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. She was a modern woman. She didn't believe in old stories anymore. But as the rain began to tap against the window, Sarah felt a strange, magnetic pull toward the street. She felt as though someone was calling her name in a whisper she could barely hear. She did not know that the darkness was not ready to let go just yet. The following morning, the weight of the previous night did not disappear. Sarah woke up to a gray New York sky and the familiar, sharp ringing of her alarm clock. As she sat on the crowded subway, surrounded by hundreds of people, she felt a sudden wave of panic. The air felt thin, and the walls of the train seemed to close in on her. She got off at the next stop, miles away from her office, and climbed the stairs to the street level. It was raining again, a cold, relentless Manhattan rain, Sarah began to walk, her expensive leather heels splashing through puddles on the sidewalk. She didn't care where she was going. She just needed to breathe. After a few blocks, she saw a small, weathered stone building tucked between two massive glass towers. It was an old Catholic chapel, a remnant of a different time. Sarah pushed open the heavy iron doors. The sound of the city vanished instantly. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of beeswax and fresh lilies. At the front of the chapel, a soft blue light flickered around a statue of the Virgin Mary. Mary's face was calm and filled with a peace that Sarah had never known. An elderly woman in a simple gray sweater was quietly wiping the wooden pews. She looked up and smiled at Sarah, not a polite, professional smile, but a look of deep, motherly recognition. "The rain brings many travelers here," the woman said softly. Her voice was like a warm blanket in a cold room. "I'm just lost," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. The woman walked closer and handed Sarah a small, blue prayer card with an image of the Virgin Mary. "You aren't lost, dear. You are just waiting to be found," she said. She then introduced Sarah to a divine principle. She told Sarah to stop trying to run her life alone. Every morning at 5:00 a.m., before the world starts screaming at you, give your first hour to her. The woman instructed, "Don't check your phone. Don't look at your emails. Just sit in the silence and ask for her protection. It's the 1% grace. Give God a small part of your day, and He will carry the rest for you." Sarah looked at the card in her hand. She felt foolish, but for the first time in years, she also felt a tiny spark of hope. She thanked the woman and stepped back out into the rain. She had a new rule to follow, a new discipline to start. But as she walked toward the subway, she felt a sudden, cold wind pull at her coat, but the darkness was not ready to let go just yet. The alarm clock buzzed at 5:00 a.m., a sound that felt like a physical blow in the cold, dark apartment. Sarah groaned and reached for her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen, ready to tap on her email app, ready to see the chaos of the New York marketing world. Then, she remembered the blue card and the elderly woman's voice. "Give your first hour to her." Sarah pulled her hand back. She sat up in bed, wrapping a thick blanket around her shoulders. The silence of the city at this hour was strange. There were no sirens yet, only the low hum of the heating vents. She sat on the floor, lit a small candle, and tried to pray. It was a disaster. For the first 10 minutes, her mind raced like a runaway train. She thought about the big presentation on Friday. She thought about her unpaid bills. She thought about the laundry she hadn't finished. Every time she tried to focus on the image of the Virgin Mary, a new worry popped into her head. Her back ached, her legs felt stiff, and her eyes kept drifting toward the clock. "This is useless," she whispered. "I'm just sitting in the dark talking to myself." The first 7 days were a grueling battle of the will. On Tuesday, she fell asleep while sitting up. On Wednesday, she quit after only 15 minutes because she was too frustrated. On Thursday, she spent the entire hour crying because the silence made her feel even more alone than the noise of the city. She felt like a failure. She was a woman who managed million-dollar accounts, yet she couldn't manage to sit still for 60 minutes. In Manhattan, everyone believes that if you work harder, you get results. But Sarah realized that prayer wasn't about working harder. It was about letting go. The resistance she felt in her body was actually her pride, fighting to stay in control. She was used to being the boss, and she didn't know how to be a child again. Despite the struggle, She forced herself to return to the mat every morning. She didn't feel a miracle yet. She didn't feel a divine glow. She just felt tired and confused. However, on the 8th day, something small changed. As she sat in the 5:00 a.m. darkness, she stopped trying to say prayers and simply started to breathe. She looked at the blue card and felt a very faint sense of warmth, like a distant fire on a cold night. It was a tiny victory, a single step in the wilderness. But as she prepared for her most stressful day at the office, she felt a lingering doubt in the back of her mind. The city was waiting for her, and it didn't care about her 5-minute peace. She wondered if she was chasing a ghost. By day 18, the dark night of the soul arrived with a vengeance. The initial hope Sarah felt had evaporated, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion. A major crisis hit her marketing firm. A multi-million-dollar client was threatening to leave, and Sarah's boss blamed her for the tension. The high-pressure world of New York was closing in on her, and the peace she had tried to build felt like a fragile glass ornament in a windstorm. That morning, Sarah sat on her floor at 5:00 a.m., but she didn't feel the presence of the Virgin Mary. Instead, she felt a cold, paralyzing fear. Her mind was a battlefield of emotional contrast loops. One moment, she tried to remember the elderly woman's words about grace. The next, a voice in her head whispered, "You are failing. Your career is over. This prayer habit is just a waste of sleep." She looked at her prayer beads, but they felt heavy and lifeless in her hands. She felt a sharp, angry desire to quit. "Why am I doing this?" she cried out to the empty apartment. "I am working harder than ever, and my life is getting worse. Where is the miracle?" She went to work, her body trembling from stress. The office was a nightmare. Phones were ringing, people were shouting, and the gray Manhattan sky outside looked like a wall of lead. During her lunch break, Sarah fled the building. She found herself walking toward the small stone chapel again, her eyes stinging with hot tears. She pushed open the iron doors and collapsed into a back pew. The silence of the chapel felt different today. It felt heavy, as if it were waiting for her. She looked at the statue of Mary, but through her tears, the face looked blurred. Sarah felt a wave of total despair. She was ready to give up on everything: her job, her discipline, and her faith. She felt completely abandoned by God in the middle of a city of millions. "I can't do this anymore," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I am too tired to be strong. I am too lonely to keep going." In that moment of total surrender, something shifted. She didn't hear a loud voice, but she felt an unexpected warmth, like a soft light beginning to glow in a dark room. It was a divine spark. She felt a gentle, motherly presence surrounding her, a peace that was far deeper than her fear. It wasn't a solution to her work problems, but a realization that she was loved regardless of her success. She realized that the dark night wasn't a punishment, it was a cleansing. It was stripping away her pride and her need to control the outcome. She stayed in the pew for a long time, not saying a word, just allowing the warmth to steady her heart. When she finally stood up, the office crisis was still waiting for her. The threat of losing her job was still real, but the paralyzing fear was gone. She walked back into the cold wind of Fifth Avenue with a quiet, steady strength she had never felt before. By tomorrow's sunrise, she would either be a new woman or lose it all. The 30th day arrived, and the city of New York felt different. The sun rose over the skyscrapers, but this time, the light didn't feel cold or metallic. It felt like a promise. Sarah woke up at 5:20 a.m. not out of fear or a sense of duty, but because she truly wanted to be in that quiet space with the divine. The God-sized hole that had caused her so much pain for years was no longer empty. It was filled with a steady, quiet grace. At the office, the crisis that had threatened her career reached its peak. Sarah sat in the boardroom, surrounded by powerful people who were shouting and arguing about numbers and contracts. In the past, Sarah would have been the loudest person in the room. She would have been shaking with anxiety. But today, she sat in a state of divine peace. She remembered the blue prayer card and the warmth she had felt in the chapel. She realized that her value did not come from a job title or a bank account, but from being a child of God. When it was her turn to speak, her voice was calm and clear. She didn't fight with ego. She spoke with truth and humility. To her surprise, the client stopped shouting. The tension in the room broke. By the end of the meeting, the contract was saved. It wasn't because Sarah had worked harder, but because she had worked differently. She had allowed God's grace to guide her actions. That evening, Sarah did not rush home to hide in her apartment. She walked through Central Park, watching the families playing and the tourists taking photos. For the first time, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt connected to every person she passed. She saw the mirror character in the tired faces of the commuters and realized she could now offer them the same hope she had found. She returned to her apartment and prepared a simple dinner. She didn't turn on the television or open her laptop. She sat at her table, lit a candle, and said a prayer of gratitude. The burden of quiet loneliness had been replaced by the gift of holy solitude. She was alone in her room, but for the first time in her life, she was not lonely. Sarah looked out at the New York skyline. The lights were still bright, and the city was still loud, but the noise no longer bothered her. She had built her life on the rock of faith instead of the sand of success. She knew that challenges would come again, but she also knew she would never have to face them alone. The Virgin Mary's silent presence had become the anchor of her soul. She smiled, picked up her prayer beads, and took a deep breath of the cool night air. She had lost her pride, but she had found her life. The miracle wasn't just that she kept her job. The miracle was that she had found peace in the middle of the storm. Faith plus action had truly equaled a miracle. Today, we followed Sarah's journey from the cold, metallic noise of New York City to the warm, quiet light of faith. Her story is a powerful reminder for everyone here at Audiobook English Stories that being busy is not the same as being alive. We often fill our lives with work, social media, and noise because we are afraid of the silence. But as Sarah discovered, it is in the silence that God and the Virgin Mary can finally speak to our hearts. Let's look back at the simple steps that changed Sarah's life. First, she had to admit she was carrying a burden she couldn't lift alone. Second, she embraced the 1% grace, giving the first hour of her day to prayer instead of her phone. It wasn't easy. She faced a wilderness of doubt and a dark night of fear. But because she chose discipline, she found a peace that the world could not take away. In the United States, we often say, "Take it one day at a time." This is a spiritual truth. You don't need to fix your whole life today. You only need to take one small step toward the light. Whether you are in a crowded city like Manhattan or a quiet village, the presence of the divine is only a prayer away. Thank you for joining us for this story on Audiobook English Stories. We hope Sarah's journey has encouraged you to look for the divine spark in your own life. Remember, true success is not found on the top floor of a skyscraper. It is found in the quiet surrender of a grateful heart. Now, I have a question for you. Are you feeling lonely in a crowded room today? What is one small thing you can surrender to God this week? Please share your prayer or your commitment in the comments below. Let us support each other as a community of faith and learners. May God bless your journey, and may you always find peace in the silence.